Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here this afternoon. I'll be reading part of this paper, and there'll be also some bits where I'll be ad-libbing a bit to the PowerPoint. There's been a slight change in the advertised title. I wanted to insert this remapping because this is a paper very much concerned with mapping. 2012 marks the 100th anniversary of the publication of Maurice Delafosse's monumental 3-volume Haute Senegal, Niger, a work which provided the first comprehensive history of the Niger, Senegal, and Volta basins. Whether one likes to admit it or not, these tomes continue to influence our expectations about the West African past. Delafosse not only defined the principal polities by which we subdivide Western Sahelian history, he supplied a set of territorial expectations for each of these polities. As Jean-Louis Triaud argued in his reevaluation of this famous work, Delafosse's provision of detailed maps acted as a sort of legitimation device, reassuring the reader of the solidity of his account. However, as we have learned to our cost, Delafosse's certitudes were often illusory and based upon premature hunches. This is particularly the case in his attribution of names and places to the historic capitals of Ghana and Mali, further refined in a subsequent publication of 1924. These attributions have led archaeologists and historians by the nose for decades, a syndrome from which we are just now beginning to break free. Indeed, when one traces most fundamental assumptions about Mandé history back to their source, one usually finds the hand of Delafosse. The problem is that many of Delafosse's sources remain difficult for us to evaluate. He naturally exploited such Arabic sources as then existed in translation, but for the most part he relied upon an unreferenced mass of colonial administrative reports, ethnographic questionnaires filled in by local colonial officers, and numerous unnamed African informants. As Triaud has incisively noted, and I translate, like an undifferentiated magma, his information gathered from oral tradition flows to fill the holes left by the written sources. Yet its scientific status is ambiguous and indefensible. Tradition, thus manipulated at second hand, forms a sort of vox populi, carrying a collective African truth which is not verifiable and only rarely liable to critique. Thus, Delafosse's many appeals to la tradition as the basis for his historic authority ring hollow today. The potential biases or mistakes of the colonial officers who supplied him with information and the manifest lack of transparency in his own evaluation and sifting of the evidence makes his work frustrating for the modern historian and archaeologist. On the one hand, he exploited valuable oral accounts which have no doubt mutated or even disappeared over the past century. On the other hand, in the absence of primary citations and transcripts, we are unable to separate Delafosse's grand narrative from its constituent elements. We are thus faced with a gigantic system of historic legend which has in many ways continued to perpetuate itself through the preformed expectations of generations of subsequent historic synthesists. I will take as an initial example the case of the historic capital of 13th century Sooso, emplaced by Delafosse in the arid Sahel south of Nara, so firmly that it is stuck unchallenged in generations of textbooks. Only a few years ago, even the doyen of Mandé history, David Conrad, wrote, quote, "The heartland of the ancient kingdom of Sooso centers on the village of Sooso. Among knowledgeable informants of northern Guinea and southwestern Mali, there are no doubts." Yet, recent research by Malian anthropologists, historians, and archaeologists, led by Moussa Sow, working in the immediate vicinity of Sooso village, has cast a skeptical light on this old certainty. Archaeological survey has found no substantive ruins in the area. More importantly, Historical investigations indicate a relatively recent invention of the region's heritage. First, the village known as Sooso, and cited by Delafosse as the eponymous capital, was first visited by Lieutenant Mage in 1863. At this time, he recorded the name of the settlement as Masoso. Interestingly, this term corresponds with a modern Malinke and Bamana term for a holding place of royal ritual paraphernalia, and is not necessarily a deformation of the word Sooso. Sadly, the village was later destroyed in the Omarian Wars, and it was only the population who refounded this village in the late 1890s who named it Sooso. Indeed, according to Mussoso, the new inhabitants appear to have no long-term connection with the region at all, merely resettling it in the wake of the conflicts of the late 19th century. Their use of the term Sooso is thus probably only a revindication of their own Mande heritage and an act of self-legitimation, rather than an actual historic correspondence with the ancient kingdom. Yet somehow this flimsy thread was grasped by Delafosse and has become part of Mali's historical geography. Chiming in from an archaeological viewpoint, I undertook survey between Banamba and Nara in 1992 across the region known as the Vallée des Serpents, and comprising much of the notional territory of Sooso. Archaeological remains post-dating the Stone Age and predating the era of tobacco pipes were rare to non-existent in the dune-laden west portion of this area. But this changed significantly in the eastern portion of this zone, near Nyono and the Office de Niger. You can see on this slide these speckled areas which are effectively fossilized dune fields that have never been remodeled by water since the Holocene, since the beginning of the Holocene. These are pre-Holocene dune fields. The actual Vallée des Serpents waterway only flowed in maybe the first 3,000 years of the Holocene. So that's to say it ceased flowing about 7,000 or 8,000 years ago. The water table in this area is very deep. This is not a very habitable area for settlement. Most settlement in the area today is Fulani, Pul, and is semi-sedentary. And it's a very thinly settled area. But this all changes once you get to about Nara and this way. Things change. But also the archaeology changes because you begin to have many tells in this area here. So it was in the better watered eastern zone that we encountered a massive set of settlement mounds known by local Fulani herders as Sasa. These mounds were covered with unpainted, cord-decorated pottery, having approximate stylistic affinities, placing them around 900 to 1400 AD. Please note that I do not insist upon an equivalence between Sasa ruin and Sooso capital, but the site and its region are worthy of serious investigation as a possible historic core of ancient Sooso. At least there is good evidence from the right time period archaeologically around Sasa, unlike around Sooso village, and this also falls within the general remit of the area of Sooso as described by Delafosse, though obviously far to the east of Sooso village. During the remainder of this evening's lecture, I'll try to unpick elements dealing with the location of capitals and heartlands of the two great empires of Ghana and Mali. In so doing, I will also be challenging the very notion of the singular, enduring state capital. I believe this is important because all of the historical certitudes underpinned by Delafosse have hobbled fresh research for decades, leaving us with borders and points drawn on maps in every textbook whose basis is largely only accumulated myth. The data I will be using is largely archaeological, interwoven sometimes with elements of oral tradition and text. I'll be confronting legend with the stark realities of survey, excavation, and radiocarbon dates. But first, I'll briefly consider data from the 18th and 19th century Malian state of Ségou, whose historic geography I've been researching over the past 7 years. Ask any griot what Ségou was, and he will claim that it was the 4 segus and the 9 marca towns. This is numerologically symbolic and cannot be taken at face value. But suffice to say, the 4 segus are representative of state-created centers of political power, essentially capitals. 4 is a propitious, occult number, and it has indeed influenced history after the fact. In fact, there were initially only 3 places bearing the name of Segu. The 4th, Segubugu, was renamed from Basanabugu, an agricultural hamlet in the right place geographically, more or less, early in the colonial era, in order to make up a 4th Segu. It's an artificially created Segu. To add to this confusion, and this is really the point of this digression, there were in fact 6 capitals of Segu in its 150-year, approximately, existence. Segukoro, Segukura, Tonmasala, Gassi, Pelengena, and Segusikoro, in that order. Thus, Segu's ratio of years to capital locations falls in at 1 to 25. What is more, these capitals were not normally great mercantile centers, and this is where the so-called marca towns come in. Marca towns are long-lived, semi-autonomous points in the state settlement landscape, essentially eternal cities. According to informants, the greatest of the marca towns are Dia, Jine, Markaduguba, and Busan. They differ from state capitals, known as Fadugu, towns of power, by their longer-term occupations and greater tendency to be produced gradually from multiple quarters or mound clusters. They also conform more to the Western idea of the city as centers of manufacture, commerce, and religious activity. Such cities existed in spite of, rather than because of, the state. Thus, we make a mistake if we project Sahelian capitals as being too much like cities. And so I just wanted to very briefly make a comparison between a Markadugu and a Fadugu. In this case, we have Markaduguba, which is a large clustered site of the sort of landscape any Sahelian archaeologist can recognize, the potsherds over rolling mounds you can see there above the Niger River in the background. These come in as high as 7 meters above the floodplain, 14 mounds in total, covering about 60 hectares. And this is, if you take Google Earth and trace the limits of the mounds over the top, to give a pretty picture, this gives you an idea of what the Markaduguba mound cluster is like. The actual town itself rests upon a tell, and it's quite extensive. It's a town which today has a strong reputation as a ritual center, as a place for securing very important amulets of spiritual power and so forth. It also has a maraboutic school. It has a market, but closer to the road because it's thought to be a place that is too dangerous to be near. So it's a marketplace well outside of the town itself. And there are many interesting stories about Markaduguba, which maybe if you ask, I'll tell you later. But for the moment, this is the same sort of, in many ways, a sort of an allied phenomena to well-researched localities like Jene, Jeno, Dia. Then, if we look at Tonmasala, in contrast, this was a town which oral tradition has been built by the Segovian ruler Tonmasa, and built and occupied over no more than a 10-year period. You can see the remains of the zigzag outer wall in this image to this side. If you want to go to Google Earth and look about 15 kilometers south of Segu, you can see it very well. The lines of the walls at 40,000 feet. Even, it's very clear, all of the walls. And we made a plan using GPS. And this aligns very well with the aerial photographs and images of the site. Each individual house is still visible on the ground, and this covers an area of about 25 hectares. But this is not some sort of clustered mercantile locality. This is something which is very much a planned settlement, and with 3 concentric walls, 2 of which are zigzag, 1 which is not zigzag, with large structures in the interior, and then off just to one side of the periphery, concentrations of houses. And again, this is something I could go over a lot more in detail later if people wish. But the main comparison I wish to draw is that on the one hand, with these eternal cities are Markadugu, eternal long occupation, versus the transitory dynastic nature of Fadugu, that the one grows organically over many centuries, whereas the other is a short-lived planned landscape, that one is guided by commercial or spiritual principles, and the other more by short-term political goals. Okay, let's leave this up here just for a moment. So, I believe Delafosse struggled to locate the capitals of Ghana and Mali, in part because he was already making two fundamental errors. First is the notion that one could enumerate only singular capitals, or perhaps sequences of 2 or 3 capitals, for such long-lived entities. Indeed, I believe we would be lucky to be able to count them on our fingers and toes. Given the capital ratio of Segu of 1 to 25, we might expect the Malian Empire at its height to have had as much as 10 capitals, and long-lived Ghana perhaps to have had as many as 20 capitals. Of course, this is only if we accept Segu as a good, relevant example, and also follow the historian David Conrad in his assertion that Mande capitals normally change with each dynastic rupture. In other words, one does not want to hold court in the same place where an ancestor was struck down by ill fortune, or where the spirit of a murdered king can haunt you. The second problem is that capitals are normally protected and well-resourced. They are surrounded by a heartland of settlement. They are in proximity to permanent bodies of fresh water, and they are plugged into a network of infrastructural support over a wider region. This does not appear to be the case for Kumbisale, the proposed capital of Ghana, and this is a good segue to our first case study. Ghana is the earliest textually recorded state in West Africa. In Al-Yaqubi's Tariq of AD 872, we find then there's the Kingdom of Ghana, whose king is also very powerful. In his country are the gold mines, and under his authority are a number of kings. Among them are the kings of Am and Sama. The 17th century Tariq es-Sudan claims that 22 kings reigned over Ghana both before and after the Hejira, which, if we put an average reign length of, say, 15 to 20 years, would put the origins of Ghana in the late 3rd century. If, you agree this is anything more than an exercise in symmetry or a bit fanciful, but archaeologically there is some reason to believe that something was happening, if not in the 3rd century, at least in the 4th century, over a large part of the Middle Niger. Nowadays, if you look at maps and history books, Ghana is largely situated in an empty zone of the Western Sahel, bordering but not centering upon the inland Niger Delta. Delafosse's original 1912 map was slightly more generous, taking in the Mema and parts of the Lakes region as comprising parts of Ghana. But he refined his views in 1924, moving Ghana's capital to the side of Kumbisale, now in southern Mauritania, and away from the vicinity both of the Mema and Nema and the Lakes region. The historiography of the identification of Ghana's capital is vast and complex, and I can only summarize it here. Kumbi, as Ghana's capital, was first referred to in the 17th century Tariq el-Fatash, and its name is likewise echoed in the oral traditions collected in the era of Delafosse around Yoro du Sahel. It is notable that these are, of course, relatively recent sources. The much earlier source of Al-Idrisi, dating to 1154, describes a capital of 2 towns on either side of a major river. This could not be Kumbisale. However, historians since the mid-19th century have been skeptical of Al-Idrisi, as his description did not tally with that of al-Bakri, written some 90 years before. That they might have been speaking of 2 entirely different capitals does not seem to have occurred to historians. That is, with the exception of the recent historiographer Pekka Massonen, who has made an effort to rehabilitate Al-Idrisi. The reason that Delafosse was inclined to choose Kumbisale as the great capital of Ghana has much to do with the sheer physicality of it. It's large, well over 100 hectares, built in stone, and it was excavated in 1915 by Delafosse's contemporary, Boniel de Mézières. It was seen as living proof of al-Bakri's large Muslim town of 12 mosques, standing 6 miles distant from the earthen-built town of the animist king. The stone ruin has been revisited by archaeologists in the 1930s, Lazartigue in the 1940s and 50s, Moni and Tomasi, and in the 1970s and 80s, Serge Denis Robert and Sophie Berthier. However, it is Sophie Berthier who has provided us with the only truly detailed site report of excavations correlated with a sequence of radiocarbon dates. Although some ill-explained radiocarbon dates were published by the Robert from the pre-architectural dune deposits dating to the 6th and 7th centuries, the sector excavated by Berthier appears to have been first occupied in the 9th century and not substantially built upon until the late 11th century, the time of the notional destruction of Ghana and its capital by the Almoravids, notionally in 1076. However, in the case of Berthier's excavation sector, occupation continues unabated until the 14th century, even after the apogee of the Empire of Mali. This miscalibration with archaeology has not yet been satisfactorily dealt with by most historians. There have, however, been some scholars, characterized by Roderick McIntosh as the, quote, minority view, who have for some time disagreed with the Delafossian notion of Kumbi-Saleh as the unique capital of Ghana. Instead, they project an expansion of ancient Ghana from a Middle Niger core. These include the historians Dirk Lange and Pekka Massonen, and some archaeologists, including the late Teraba Togola and myself. As Massonen has written, no positive evidence has as yet been unearthed that might allow us to identify the ruins of ancient Ghana with certainty, and no remains of the king's own town have hitherto been discovered. Kumbi-Saleh was certainly an important commercial center in the western Sahel when Ghana was in existence. The city may even have served as a model for some of the descriptions of Ghana written by medieval Arabic authors. The historians in favor of Kumbi-Saleh have also forgotten that the site lacks the agricultural hinterland for such a large administrative center. And this brings me back to my linking argument. Few historic African states have situated their capitals virtually at their own frontier, without a ring of defensible settlements and not amidst a significant agricultural heartland. Kumbi-Saleh would have been at the mercy of long-distance commerce for its food supply. In a case of special pleading, Susan McIntosh in 2008 has even argued that part of Kumbi-Saleh's population might have been seasonally mobile agro-pastoralists. There are, however, simpler solutions which form part of the argument against Kumbi-Saleh having been anything other than a late capital or perhaps merely Ghana's primary trade entrepot. Since the 1970s, archaeological teams from Mali, the Netherlands, America, Britain, and France have been surveying the Middle Niger and areas to the westwards, all the way to Kumbi-Saleh itself. What has been discovered is a dense landscape of early settlement in the inland delta, the lakes region, and the Mema. Dense settlement around Kumbi itself appears to be lacking. Excavations at a range of settlement mounds, including Jinijino, Dia, Akumbu, and Moisam, have shown sequences beginning as early as the first millennium BC, with widespread earthen architecture and long-distance trade beginning in the 4th century AD, the notional start point for Ghana. Around Kumbi-Saleh itself, there is little of note until the 10th century AD. So looking just at a few of these, this is some of the distribution of sites from approximately the time of the Empire of Ghana, which came out of the 1980s French Mali Mission Inventaire, with a lot of sites, particularly at the western end of the Mali Lakes region, significant tell sites, including 2 sites which were excavated in depth. Then this is one of my favorite figures, which always to me shows the great density of tell sites waiting to be investigated in the inland delta, put together by the Netherlands Mali team, and with the cluster of Djenné down at the bottom, but just showing how many sites are out there yet to be investigated, and again, as I say, the great density of these sites. And then there was the 1989-1990 MEMA survey undertaken by Terabatoglu and myself when we were both doctoral students. And in the course of the survey, we recorded well over 200 sites, and you can see them as little red blobs on this map. A good number of these date to the time of the Empire of Ghana. And just to briefly expand upon this, if we look at these in terms not of single mounds, but the total hectares covered by mound clusters, leaving out any space in between the mounds, we can see that fairly early on a settlement hierarchy begins to develop. That is, between about 400 and 600 AD, you have mound clusters going up to around 20 hectares in size. But it's only from about 600 AD that things really take off, and you begin to have much larger mound clusters, certainly moving into things which would be indisputably probably termed urban on the basis of size. And most importantly, you have the massive cluster of Tulaje weighing in at about 100 hectares, one of the largest sites in Mali. And this is originally, Tulaje was marked on the IGN 1 to 100,000 topo map as an escarpment. It's not an escarpment at all. It is pure archaeological site. You can walk into erosion gullies on the side of it. This is it viewed from 2 kilometers away, just to give you an idea of the size of this site. It has a height, a measured height above the plain, and this is pure archaeological deposit, of 15 meters. This has to be close to a record holder. And that's actually looking basically across half the site towards the edge. The largest mound of Tulaje measures 76 hectares. So this is a site as large as Kumbisale. The name Tulaje is a probably more recent Fulani name. Gosh knows what it might have been in the more distant past. But it's significant that this is in an area. And it has also, I should say, midway down the sequence, Rimbaud ran a radiocarbon date, which is around 900 AD. So this is very much in the era of Ghana. Amazing sites, but not articulating with the current historic narrative. The site of Akumbu was excavated by Terabatoglu for his doctoral dissertation. We excavated it together. And the site is linked by oral traditions to one of the sons of Dinga, the great mythic Soninke Ghana Wagadu founder figure. The initial occupation of the site goes back to the 1st millennium BC, with the same sort of pottery we term Fida pottery, which is found at the basal levels of Dia, dated to this 800, 200 BC period. The first radiocarbon dates for the site come in during this early period when all of the mounds are occupied. So this is between 400 and 1100 AD. This is the time period, notional time period of Ghana. And the site begins to be abandoned around 1100 to 1350. You have only very limited occupation at the site. And so, also, this is something which I've always found quite remarkable. In Akbar al-Zaman's account about the people of Ghana, AD 1000, he says, the people of Ghana adorned their women with copper rings and put cowrie shells in their hair. This is a burial which I myself excavated at Akumbu. And here we have a woman, she was a young woman, early 20s, who is wearing 2 copper bracelets and has 13 cowries arranged in her hair, and she has a water pot at her feet. And to me, this sort of correspondence is remarkable. It's, it's nothing certain, but it's remarkable. The Mima itself was abandoned, almost entirely abandoned. Akumbu, as I say, declines after 1100 AD. There was increasing climatic instability after 1100 AD, with sustained droughts from 1250 AD. So the notion is the waterway which fed this chain of lakes in the Mima silted up at a time of extreme drought, and then water could never get back over, and the area was no longer flooded. The population left the zone. And it does make one think almost also of the Beta myth and Dinga, and essentially the complete abandonment, the complete desertification of an entire area. In this case, an area of about a quarter of the size of the inland delta. It's massive abandonment. Also, we should not forget the case of El-Walaji in the Lakes region. This monumental tumulus, initially excavated by Deplania in 1904, conforms closely to the earthen tumuli of the Empire of Ghana as described by Al-Bakri in 1068. Its radiocarbon dating by the Mission Inventaire team in 1991 would seem to confirm this association with a calibrated result of 1010 to 1260 AD. Why, then, should a monumental and potentially regal tomb of the time period of Ghana be so far away from Kumbisale, were it not the center of gravity of the empire lay much further to the east? Thus, there's every reason to research Ghana's point of origin, and indeed its political center, closer to the Middle Niger, rather than in the desert. And now for Mali, the finale of this lecture. Scholarly speculation as to the location of its historic center has flourished since the 1840s and is largely consumed by attempts to disentangle the itinerary of Ibn Battuta's visit to the Malian capital in 1352. In 1841, the British historian Cooley posited it to have been at or near the town of Same or Sama, visited by Mungo Park, probably, located between Niamina and Ségou. Subsequently, in 1892, Benger indicated, but did not visit, possible ruins of a Malian capital called Nyani Madugu, a locale between Niamina and Koulikoro. Delafosse retained this locality as the probable core of the mature Empire of Mali in his 1912 publication. However, events were afoot which led to a change of heart in Delafosse and a revision of his views about the historic geography of Mali. In 1923, two colonial administrators, Vidal and Gaillard, redirected research away from the Middle Niger and reoriented it towards northern Guinea and the site of Nyani on the Sankarani. Vidal, in the first of a pair of articles, rejected Benger's location of Nyani Madugu for three reasons. First, that a watercourse traversed by Ibn Battuta 10 miles from the capital could not have been the Marigot of Niamina, because this Marigot would have been too small to be the river described. Second, that there are today few Malinke around Ségou. And third, that there are, quote, no significant ruins in the Niamina-Koulikoro region, nor in any adjoining regions. Neither the writings of Vidal nor Gaillard give us any reason to believe that this last assertion was based on any actual archaeological fieldwork. And as we shall see, our own recent fieldwork has proven this assertion to be false. Nevertheless, Gaillard undertook fieldwork at Nyani on the Sankarani in 1923, and so set the stage both for the placement of D.T. Nyan's celebrated version of the Sunjata epic at this southern Nyani, and also for the later fieldwork of Ladislav Filipoviak at the site between 1965 and 1973. Needless to say, Delafosse also embraced Vidal's idea in his 1924 paper concerning the locations of Ghana and Mali, although altering it with the addition of an earlier capital near modern Kangaba termed Djeliba. But as every African historian and every African history student knows, Sunjata's eventual capital was at Nyani on the Sankarani. Or was it? It is an open secret that archaeologists today have largely rejected this hypothesis. Let us explore why. To begin, it's instructive to examine Gaillard's original text. He posits a succession of 4 Nyanis based upon local ruins and the oral traditions that he and Vidal collected. Nyani 1, which is said to be a large town of unknown affiliation, which was destroyed during a war with invaders from the east. The location of this town was stated not to be known by Gaillard. Then there's Nyani 2, a town settled by a descendant of Sunjata Keita, Mansa Mamaru, who reigned over the local region. This town was supposedly destroyed by, quote, Bambara warriors at the end of the 17th century. Then there is Nyani 3, a refoundation dating to the 18th century and ruled by Nfa Kaba Keita. Nyani, this third Nyani, was said to be destroyed yet again by warfare, this time by Bamana Ségou during the 19th century. And then there was the modern village of Nyani, which was refounded in 1877. It is interesting that Nyani 1 was only linked to Imperial Mali by scholarly conjecture rather than by local tradition from the very outset, and that Nyani 2 could be only seen to correspond with the reduced state of Mali after the Songhai conquests of the late 15th century. Finally, and critically, Gaillard states that the walls of Ñani 3, which we see here dotted beneath beneath the modern town of Ñani, and these numbers of 2 and 3 signifying Ñani 2 and 3, were still partially standing during his field work. They were pointed out as being walls of this town by local informants, and it's likely that the substantial ruins that are visible in the upper layers south of Ñani correspond with this 18th century, 19th century town. Yet, it is this very area, Gaillard's Ñani 3, that Filipoviak termed Ñani Station 1. We can see it again here at the far left-hand side of this map by Filipoviak. And he took this to be the center of Sunjata's capital. This included ruins of a large mosque and an audience chamber, both more probably dating to 17th, 18th, 19th century Ñani. The local oral traditions collected by Gaillard and Vidal were simply pushed to one side where inconvenient. There's also the question of dates. It should therefore come as no surprise that Filipoviak's dates for this unique monumental area span a time period, and this is again if we calibrate them afresh from the original report, of only 1450 to 1800 AD. These are logical dates for the capital of post-imperial Mali and or a local capital sacked by Segu. An earlier radiocarbon date of circa AD 540 to 770 occurs below these after a discontinuity in the sequence. Thus, Filipoviak was quite without radiometric proof linking Ñani on the Sankarani to the apogee or even the founding of Imperial Mali. Yet this association has remained in textbooks by the force of Jitinyan's best-selling epic, if not by default. As early as 1973, the historian John Hunwick was already expressing doubts about Ñani on the Sankarani and trying to redirect research eastwards. Only in 2005 did our team actually begin to do so. And again, here, for Hunwick, the location of the capital is closer to this number 3, almost at the center of this, or a little bit off center of this map, but nearer to Segu. In undertaking our survey of the oral traditions and archaeology of Segu, we kept encountering large tells which were both manifestly earlier than Segu and linked by oral traditions to times before Segu and the time of Imperial Mali. For example, just to name one example, Markadugaba was said to be freed from the tyranny of a Kieta ruler by sorcery, and another place, Soratomo, was said to be the local capital of Sunjata's greatest warlord, Silamakamba Koita. Indeed, this name Silamakamba features in a minor Mande epic, placing him sometime after that of Sunjata, but still within the time frame of the Malian Empire. And these are just two oral traditions linking Soratomo and Mali. In the great Malian oral epic Sunjata, you have the arrow shot by Sunjata bouncing off Sumanguro and flying over several significant towns. A town name which occurs quite frequently is that of Soro. And also in Leo Frobenius, in his Dicton on Dinkin, he records the 3 great towns in the era of Mali were Ñani, the capital of Sunjata. West of this was Sooso, the capital of Sumanguro, and further still was Suro, the capital of Sirama. So, in 2006, we commenced excavations at Soratomo and continued them in 2010. Our initial results both confirm that its date is concurrent with the Empire of Mali, and there are important stylistic connections with the Mande heartland. This is a plan of the principal mound of Soratomo, which weighs in at about 72 hectares. Most of the site is relatively shallow, only probably about 1 meter of stratigraphy, with some higher plateaued areas up to 4 meters in height. There is a distant circle of satellite sites. There are a few closer satellite sites, including one mound called by locals, and it was even called by locals back in the 50s. It was mentioned by Pajar, the colonial administrator, as the Grand Mosque, and another as the Petit Mosque. But if you look at these satellites on the Grand Mosque is interesting because it has what looks to be a different sort of pottery than on the main mound, very heavily decorated, a lot of very nicely made wares. Whereas the little mosque has no pottery on it at all and appears perhaps to be a laterite-covered tumulus or some sort of structure without a lot of material cultural remains on the top. Also, 1 kilometer from Soratomo is this remarkable mine site covering 6 hectares with more than 100 visible mine shafts. And this is the Sulukutu mines, basically meaning the forest of the hyenas. The thing that's rather curious is you'd expect with all of this that you would have a lot of iron smelting sites nearby. You don't. We have looked and looked, and we have not found large iron smelting sites anywhere in the vicinity. I hope to one day continue looking. But this, in some senses, still leaves the possibility these might in fact be gold mining sites. Certainly they agree in sort of morphology and in terms of their spoil with gold mining sites further south in Mali. And it would take some sort of metallurgical investigation to see whether or not this is the case. But again, as I say, so much mining and so little iron smelting is a peculiar combination. This is the larger exposure that we excavated at Soratomo in 2010. This was a rather brusque, brutal abandonment. It's almost Pompeii-esque. We have 35 intact pots from this one unit in the abandonment layer, along with many small finds and also human remains. There with this as we expand the unit, you see more pots popping up. Every room had pots in it, as well as spindle whorls, caches of cowries, glass beads. This is a Venetian glass bead on the bottom, and also weapons, including a scabbard, arrowhead, a spearhead. And also human remains which had been gnawed by carnivores. And also the building itself was burned upon abandonment, and we have a beam of structural timber that we dated as part of all of this. So every indication is a relatively violent abandonment or sudden abandonment of this site. Oh yeah, we'll get just one sec. No problem. So the amendments in the 15th century. But I just want to point out a couple of things. One thing that's curious is beneath, if you go through the earth of these, if you remove the bogoton, the rammed earth foundations, you find these lines of double cobbles, which you see here where we've removed part of this, which exactly match the lines of double cobbles that you get not only at Kangaba, but also that you get at Nyani on the Sankarani, which is rather incredible and unique. Additionally, if we look at the pottery, there's a dominance of 3 types of roulettes. This type A here is what sometimes called accordion pleat roulette or folded strip roulette. B is fish vertebra roulette, particularly of the Gymnochus niloticus. And C is a type of roulette which is a braided strip roulette, which has been referred to in the literature by Anne Mayor as Scooby-Doo. And these same roulettes are the roulettes that we found in combination at in the dated sort of, Empire of Mali layer at Kurun Kurukale in the Upper Niger, where I did survey in '92. The pot rims also conform very well. So there's also a link in the pottery towards the Sibi region of Mali as well, into the Haute Vallée. Not so much with Nyani, the pottery, but the pottery is very similar. I have in my office comparative collections from both, and the similar rim forms, similar decor types. So there are real connections with the notional Mande heartland. These are the radiocarbon dates which we have run so far. There are 5 of them. And so from the foundation layers, we have, sort of 1210 to 1280 AD, so dead at the beginning of what's notionally supposed to be the Empire of Mali, and an abandonment sometime probably, before 1500 AD. And this correlates very well with the 3 historic military campaigns of the Songhai into this area in 1460, 1473, and 1499. So this abandonment could well be linked to one of these violent episodes coming from the east. So Soratomo, if we look just at, say, in terms of central mounds, which is a dangerous thing, whether how you quantify sites, central mounds, clusters, what have you, is 72 hectares. If we add in the surrounding sites, well over 100. Tulaje, also very big. Jashoma, biggest mound of Jah, 50 hectares. Jinijino, 33. This is a big site. So, I mean, what are we looking at here? Is this some kind of local capital of Sirama, Silmakamba Koita? Or is this perhaps one of the many capitals of the Empire of Mali? It's difficult to say. It's especially difficult to say until we can get into areas of Tamani and towards Nyamina, where there might be other such sites. But this is a part of the delta I very much want to look at in more depth. So, to conclude, with all of the foregoing in mind, I'd like to assert that the center of gravity of the Mande world was originally much farther east than originally supposed. Perhaps as people have drifted to the westwards, pushed by Songhai aggression in the late 15th century and by the wars of Segu and the Fulani Jihad in the 19th century, their symbolic landscapes have shifted as well. This aspect, or at least the considerable breadth of the legendary topography of the Malinke world, will be addressed by Sirio Canos Donae tomorrow. This is not just the case for Mali. All of the shifts of historic centers of gravity that I have proposed in this lecture are from west to east. From a purely geographic standpoint, this should not be surprising. The breadbasket of the Mande world is the Middle Niger, better for crops than the Western Sahel with its deep water table and scarce standing water, better for livestock and horses than the savanna forest of southern Mali and northern Guinea. This might also explain why there are three regions of Mali termed Do, both the origin point of the Mande universe and the mythic homeland of the mother of Sunjata Keita, Mali's first legendary ruler. As griotic and political centers have shifted to the westwards, I would argue so too have corresponding new Do been created. It is particularly tragic that just as archaeology has begun to make progress in rediscovering the lost worlds of Mande peoples, that political unrest and the vandalism of Ansar Dine threaten both the lives of our friends in Mali and their heritage. Let us do all we can to work to help our friends in their time of need, in the hope that we can return to develop and revise the histories collected by Delafosse a century ago. Thank you.